Hi everyone, and welcome to video 2 of our 6-video series in the Customer Satisfaction Survey Toolkit. Funded by Community Sector Banking through the 2019 Social Investment Grants Program, and in partnership with the New South Wales Council of Social Service, Survey Matters have produced this series of short, educational videos to help NGOs understand best practice when conducting customer satisfaction surveys. You will have seen this picture in the first video, and it provides an overview of the video series. This second video, Designing the Research, will take you through the customer satisfaction survey design or planning process. We'll provide an explanation of the difference between quantitative and qualitative research, as well as all of the things that you need to think about before starting your survey, such as your objectives, your intended audience, and how best to reach them. When you commence a research project, there are a series of steps that it will be important for you to undertake. This slide gives you an overview of that complete survey research process. You will find that these align with the video series, with each video covering a different aspect of the process. As you can see, the first step in your survey activity is to design the program. We'll go through this in detail in this video. In following videos, we'll go through the next steps, such as questionnaire design, fieldwork and data collection, analysis and data reporting. The first step in any customer satisfaction survey activity is design or planning, and there are a number of design considerations before starting your customer satisfaction survey. The first step in any survey is to define the problem you are trying to solve and what you want to achieve. Many of your customer satisfaction survey design decisions are determined by your objectives, so it's always really important to start with your objectives firmly in mind. Based on your objectives, you then need to decide on your methodology, and specifically what I mean by that is whether it's more appropriate to use qualitative or quantitative research. We'll go through each of these methods. Next, it's important that you give adequate thought to who is in your target audience and how you're going to reach them. Finally, you'll need to decide if you're going to conduct your survey face-to-face, using an online survey instrument, by sending out paper surveys, or maybe by contacting people to complete the survey over the telephone. We'll go through each of those in detail too. As I mentioned, survey design starts with defining your objectives. And this is always the first and most important step in your research. Your research objectives clearly spell out what your survey is trying to achieve. What questions do you want to answer? What are you trying to measure? And how are you going to use the results? We always suggest using the SMART method when setting your objectives. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-specific. And you actually really want to try and make sure that your objectives are all of those things. Okay, so once you've defined your objectives, you're in a position to determine the best approach or the methodology for your research. And there are two main approaches: qualitative and quantitative research. And while these two approaches are alternatives to each other, you can also use both in a project if you need to, as they offer different benefits. So what are they? Qualitative research uses either face-to-face, telephone, or online discussions maybe, with groups or individuals to explore attitudes and opinions. These discussions ask general questions and they encourage long-form, open responses and discussion. It uses observations and verbal narratives to build understanding of a topic. While qualitative research is not designed to provide representativeness in any statistical sense, the method is often used and is very effective to develop understanding of an issue. In general, qualitative research is more informal and less structured. Quantitative research, on the other hand, is a scientific method that does use a structured set of questions to understand majority opinion about a subject. It uses largely closed questions where participants are asked to select a response that most closely aligns with their situation or opinion. Quantitative research usually aims to test theories, establish facts, and is often used to provide that statistical or numerical evidence to support a position. In general, quantitative studies use a specific, pre-planned and structured set of questions, and as a result, it tends to be more formal than qualitative research. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of each method? The advantage of qualitative research is that it provides really rich, in-depth information, which provides a more nuanced understanding than a quantitative survey. It's often used to explain the why factor for the topic under consideration. As I said, qualitative research is also more flexible, and as a result, it can be more easily adapted during the research, as the interviewer responds to feedback provided by the participants and maybe asks some different questions depending on the feedback that is being received. The interviewer can also pick up on those face-to-face and non-verbal indicators and cues that might not be evident in written responses, but are really important to getting that nuanced understanding. The main disadvantage of qualitative research is firstly that it's more expensive to conduct, but also that it can be harder to generalise the findings to the wider population under consideration. And as a result, we often say that results can only be relied upon as indicative or suggestive of wider views. They provide you some examples of what specific people or individuals or groups are thinking. Consisting of written data, qualitative feedback can also be time-consuming to analyse, as you've got interview or group recordings or notes that need to be transcribed, they need to be themed, they need to be summarised. That takes time, it's a manual exercise. The advantage of quantitative research, on the other hand, is that it generally takes less time. You can gather larger amounts of information and it's much more cost-effective. Quantitative research can also be used to provide that statistical evidence, and given adequate sample size, the findings can be generalised to the wider population. So that means that you can say that the results of the survey reflect the views or the situation of the target audience that you're analysing. The findings also usually have greater reliability and validity just because of this larger sample that you're working with, and so you can compare the results across time, across studies and across groups. The main disadvantage of a quantitative survey, on the other hand, is that it can lack that depth and richness that a qualitative research project can provide. Sometimes quantitative-only surveys miss the story that a qualitative project can give you. So how do you decide which methodology to use? As I said, while qualitative and quantitative are alternatives, they can be used to complement each other. And often, many studies that we do use a combination of both, and then you get the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, often budget prevents this, and so you have to make a choice. So generally, you'd use qualitative research to develop understanding of an issue, to explore feelings and ideas about a topic, and to understand different perspectives between groups of people, or even to develop case studies and stories. For example, you might use qualitative research to develop a case study about the impact of a particular program on an individual or a group. Conversely, quantitative research is used to provide data and statistical evidence, to understand majority opinion and provide evidence of outcomes. And as a result, it's often used to form the basis of recommendations for particular services or activities or programs. It might be used for funding applications or to provide proof of program outcomes. So for example, the statistics from a survey can be used to prove the proportion of people in a group have been positively impacted by participation in a program or activity that your organisation provides. So the next thing you need to do after you've decided whether you're doing quantitative or qualitative research is that you need to decide your sample, and your sample must reflect your objectives. So what are the things to consider when you choose your sample? The first thing you need to look at is who you are trying to reach. Then you need to decide whether you can achieve a representative sample. And finally, how are you going to reach this target audience? We'll go through each of these things. So the first thing to consider, as I said, is who you are trying to reach. And this will depend really totally on your research objectives and which group of people is able to provide the information or feedback that's going to answer your key research questions. Who can give you the answers that you're looking for? So for example, if the objective of your research is to understand the adequacy of your volunteer training, you'll need to speak with anyone who has volunteered with your organisation in the recent past. If you want to understand client satisfaction with your services, you'll need to reach out to people who have used your service recently. The next thing you need to look at is when choosing your sample, you need to consider whether you think you'll be able to obtain a sample that's representative of your target audience. And by that I mean a representative sample is one where the people who complete your survey have similar characteristics to the larger population. So for example, if you're wanting to understand the views of your volunteers by age group, you need to ensure that you have enough people in each group to accurately reflect a real world scenario. So for example, if your volunteer base is 25% of them are under 30 years of age, 50% of your volunteers are aged between 30 and 60, and then 25% are aged over 60, then you need to make sure that your sample has a similar distribution. Well, we'll talk about sample composition in more detail in video 4. It's important to note here that this is just something that you need to contemplate and consider. It's not always possible to make sure your sample is entirely representative. It's just you need to try and achieve as good a spread as possible, and then indicate in your analysis where this is not the case. The next consideration you have is how you're going to reach that target audience. And the main choices really are whether you'll collect the survey data face-to-face by distributing an online survey or by using a paper questionnaire. You might also look to telephoning people if that's the best way to contact them. Now, at this point, I just wanted to mention, the several considerations as to how you reach people, and we'll talk about these in a minute. But usually the contact list that you have is one of the main considerations. And if you have contact details for your target audience, you need to first check that you have permission to use those contact details for research purposes. So if you do have permission to email or call the people on your list, then you can go ahead and do that directly to conduct the survey. At the same time, when you are conducting people, you need to make sure in any communications that you send that you advise people that they can opt out of the research at any time. And if they choose to do that, obviously you need to unsubscribe them from your research list. Unfortunately, if you don't have permission, you can't email them the survey, and you'll need to find another way of doing it. Okay, so then we get to choosing your approach, and that really is working out how you are going to reach your target audience, and your research objectives, your budget, and the audience is going to come into play here when you're choosing which approach to take. But overall, I think the main takeaway from here is that the decision really depends on your target group of who you are trying to reach, their access to different formats, and how they are most likely to respond to the survey. So while overall budget comes into play, you really need to make sure that the people you're trying to reach can access the method that you choose. So as I said, the format options for quantitative surveys are face-to-face, online surveys, paper or mail surveys, or telephone surveys. There's those 4 main options to help you make an informed decision. I just thought we'd go through each of those to give you a rundown on the advantages and disadvantages of each method. So face-to-face surveys, if you're running a quantitative face-to-face, they're usually conducted as an intercept survey, where you stop someone in a public place and ask them to complete your survey. Or alternatively, you might make an appointment to assist someone to complete the survey over the phone. Face-to-face, sorry. If you have the resources to conduct a face-to-face survey, there are some real benefits. If you're approaching people to participate in the survey, you're able to ensure you're talking to the right people and that the respondent is focused on the questions they are answering. Like in qualitative research, the interviewer is also able to capture that verbal and non-verbal cues from respondents, and that can enhance your understanding of their feelings towards the topic under consideration. And of course, face-to-face might be the only way to reach some groups, so it may be your only choice. So for example, unknown attendees at a large-scale community event, that would have to be done with intercept surveys on a face-to-face basis. There are, however, some things to be aware of with face-to-face surveys, and firstly, there's the cost. It's much more expensive to conduct surveys face-to-face, as you might need several interviewers to collect enough data. You might need to do it over several days, and it can take a while to actually get to the people that you need to. Secondly, unless you can collect the data by digital means, and that's using an iPad, for example, any surveys you need to collect will have to be collated. So you'll have some manual data entry to calculate your results. Use of iPads to do that, though, is pretty widespread now and is probably the best way of doing it. Finally, the quality of the data can also be dependent on the interviewer. So it's really important that the interviewer receives adequate training, and that's to ensure that they don't lead participants or they don't influence the responses in any other way. So what about online surveys that are programmed in survey software for respondents to access online? They're usually distributed via email if you have direct contact details, or they might be embedded in organisational newsletters or via social media if you're trying to reach a wider audience. Now, they're widely used for a number of reasons. The most obvious of these is time and cost. An online survey can be distributed relatively quickly and at low cost. And as a result, it allows you to reach a larger group of people. Results can also usually be analysed immediately, with the data collected is compiled automatically by the software. Online surveys can also be completed at a time that suit participants, and so they can take their time and think about their answers and do it at a time that's convenient to them. Some of the disadvantages of online surveys, they're largely technical disadvantages. For example, sometimes your survey invitation doesn't reach its intended recipient if, for example, the email is caught by spam filters. There can also be technical glitches with the software that prevents people from entering their data. It might not work with certain browsers. It might be blocked by firewalls. And so your respondents can't access your survey. And that can just mean that you lose the opportunity to collect a response. Online surveys also are obviously not suitable if a large part of your target audience doesn't have internet access. Paper surveys can often be the most convenient or sometimes the only option, and they're usually mailed out to participants, or they might be completed on site. For example, after taking a training course or attending an event or at a reception or other shared area where people are able to access the paper survey. And what they do is they provide access for respondents without internet access. And they can also be used if you don't have any other way of getting to your respondents. There are, however, some things to consider of using paper surveys. I think the main issue with them is that paper surveys can be expensive and it's much slower. Paper surveys need to be designed to ensure that the layout is clear and easy to complete. You might need a graphic designer to lay it out for you, and that adds to your cost. But also, if surveys are being distributed by post, the costs really can mount up because you need to obviously post them to all of your target audience and then put prepaid reply envelopes for them to be sent back to you. Return surveys also need to be compiled and entered into either survey software or Excel or some other way of you aggregating the results. And so that's a manual process that is time consuming and expensive. Data quality can also be an issue. It's something that you need to be mindful of with paper surveys. Respondents can skip questions. They can put multiple answers for the same question. Sometimes people just don't read the paper survey, and so you do end up losing some of those surveys because of that. Finally, another way to reach people if you don't have email addresses or there's a population with limited internet access is via the telephone. Surveys have for a very long time been conducted by telephone. And telephone surveys really are a convenient way to reach a large number of people, both known and unknown participants. They also give you a way to reach a truly random sample of respondents if that's what you're looking for. Surveys conducted by phone can also improve data quality as they allow the person conducting the survey to provide explanations to respondents and make sure that they understand the questions. On the other hand, telephone surveys do have some limitations, and like with face-to-face surveys, it is important that your interviewers receive adequate training to ensure that they don't lead participants or influence their responses in any other way. This is particularly so as telephone surveys usually have some time limits and that need to be completed in a set amount of time. Telephone surveys obviously can also have issues with reaching some respondents, as there's always going to be people who screen calls and hang up. So that concludes our video on survey planning and design considerations, which hopefully gave you some idea of what you need to consider as you plan your survey. As I said, there are 6 videos that provide more information. The next one's about questionnaire design and programming. Then we go into field work and data collection, and finally analysis and reporting. We also have one video that talks about privacy and ethics and things you need to consider as you conduct a survey. If you've got any questions, we're also available by phone or email, so please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're more than happy to have a chat and help you over the phone if there's anything we can do to assist. So thank you very much for watching.